If you're asking me, I think the pinnacle status a fragrance can reach is timelessness. This is when the era it came out in may as well be any point in time. The scent of a fragrance like this transcends time. It's always contemporary, always modern. While it can be traced back to the time it came from, you'd be hard pressed to call it old-fashioned to wear today. Now, I understand that that is a very subjective point of view, but the fragrances we're going to be talking about today, many of them are older than a lot of you guys. Some of you guys, you remember when these came out. Some of you guys were already around before these fragrances came out, but I think the majority of you were little tykes running around in the grass or not yet born. We're talking about vintage gems. These are timeless fragrances. Now, we need to define vintage. I'm not going to get too deep into it, but the terms antique, vintage, and retro are often used interchangeably, but they are not exactly the same. Focusing on vintage, I looked it up, I did some research, and in a few different places I found that in general, vintage should be something that is no less than 20 years old. All the fragrances I'm talking about are still available to purchase. There's a reason for that. Again, timelessness. Let's get into these 8 fragrances right now. We have fragrances that date back to the mid 1960s and even one that dates back to pre-1900, technically speaking. I'll explain. This first one here is from 1966 and it's Dior Oh Savage, the Eau de Toilette. I think to some noses, this will smell like it didn't just come out yesterday, but comparatively speaking, this does not smell like an almost 60-year-old fragrance. It is a classic citrus aromatic. I haven't smelled the older versions, but I imagine it still somewhat captures the magic of the original. That bright, sharp green citrus, lemon, really speaks here. Bitter, but there is this very elegant fruitiness to it. It's not too tart, and it is backed up by some herbs, by some oak moss, some woods, a classic style. This is very, very French. This is something that you can wear when you want to be classy pretty much any time, but I'd say it really shines spring and summer, and I would primarily reach for this during the daytime, but you could wear it at night too, especially if you're going to be a little bit more dressed up. There's a reason why this is still on the shelves all these years later. Dior Oh Savage. This is in no particular order, by the way. Next one up here, let's stay in the house of Dior. A little bit newer, from 1988, we do have Fahrenheit. Now, I'll be honest with you guys. I don't wear Fahrenheit very much, mostly because it's not my wife's favorite fragrance. Now, she doesn't say it smells dated or old-fashioned. To her, she just doesn't love the scent profile. She doesn't love violet leaf, at least right now. And violet leaf is written all over this fragrance. You gotta love that fresh metallic. Some people say like cucumbers. Some people say ozonic. There's so many names to describe violet leaf and the scent of it. But in this case, people say it smells a little bit like gasoline or petrol. I have never quite got that. I can see where they're coming from if I frame that in my mind, but this is way more pleasant than the smell of petrol or gasoline. Yes, there is an odd freshness to it. There is an odd, subtle sweetness to it. And there's this beautiful leather backing it up, very supple. The thing that I love and appreciate about this fragrance so much is that it does not smell like it came out in the 1980s at all. This smells completely timeless. One of the most timeless fragrances I have ever smelled, unless you have a strong association to people in your life who wore this back around the time it came out and maybe a little bit after that. This is going to smell contemporary. Now, it might smell a little odd for sure, and that's what makes it such a trailblazer. Dior was really doing stuff that no one else was doing. They were taking chances and it worked. This is still being sold today, and too many flankers to count as a result of its success. That is Dior Fahrenheit, hailing from the iconic year of 1998. I don't know what was iconic about it, but I'm sure some interesting stuff happened that year, because interesting stuff happens every year. This is Declaration from Cartier, from Jean-Claude Elena. This is such a special fragrance, utterly timeless and so unique. What he put together here to make something that's relatively easy to wear, very versatile, can function as a signature, but uses elements that are a little odd that you would not expect to work together as one accord. Cardamom, bitter orange, maybe some other spices in there, maybe a little bit of leather, but primarily that fresh spicy cardamom, the tiny bit of sweetness that it brings with the not so bright but still citrusy presence of bitter orange. And there is a woody dry down and a touch of rose tucked in there. I have seen this be a little bit polarizing for some guys. Some guys do find it to be maybe not old-fashioned, but just a little different, a little odd, especially if you smell it up close. I do think there's cumin in here as well, and cumin is not everybody's favorite spice, especially when you shove it up your nostrils. So you have been warned. If you do happen to try this, don't just put it right up your nose and make your assessment. Wear it, or at least put it on your skin and let it come to you. Get it in the air. You're going to get the full effect that way. But this is a timeless masterpiece. I don't throw that word around flippantly. Cartier Declaration. Now, technically, this fragrance was released in 1882, but as you can imagine, it has been reformulated. The brand has gone through changes. It's just what happens with time, but it's still out here. An iteration of it is still available today. It was refreshed in 2010, thanks to perfumer Rodrigo Flores Roux. He was commissioned to do it, and I think he did a wonderful job. Haven't smelled the original, but again, like Oh Savage, I think the magic is probably still intact. From Houbigant, this is Fougere Royale. This is easily one of my favorite fougères. It does carry a little bit of a sophisticated flair, which could remind you of an older gentleman, but not necessarily of an older time. It's still very modern. It's still something you would expect someone to smell like today. It does have the classic ingredients here, lots of clean, fresh lavender, creating a soapy cleanliness, citruses and spices and herbs mixing together, giving it this pop, this brightness, contributing to this clean freshness. But it does have a lot of depth with woods and moss, a little bit of this interesting bitterness that I think makes it more sophisticated. I have other fougères like At the Barber's from Margiela, which very much smells like a modernized fougere. You can tell this has roots to it. It has heritage because of certain elements in it that make it smell a little bit more mature, but it's still, again, super modern. Amazing. And I love the way it wears on the skin around you. It's so freaking classy. This is Fougere Royale from Houbigant. Get a sample if you can. I'll link to what I can find down below. We have a 1990s classic, 1994 to be exact, that was refreshed, but from what I understand, it's virtually unchanged from its original version. From Paco Rabanne, a brand that I don't care much about these days, we have Excess. This was relaunched in 2018. Now, I'll admit, if you are familiar with some classic fragrances from the 1990s, this will smell a little bit like the 1990s in its freshness and its cleanliness. To me, it's a little bit peripheral to something like Burberry Touch, maybe a little bit of like Liz Claiborne Sport, but I do think Burberry Touch might have a little bit more character to it, a little bit more of a unique quality. This represents some of the most idiomatic elements of 1990s fragrances. Very fresh and clean, soapy, a little bit powdery, a little musky and woody, but as it dries down, it just becomes this easy fade into the background, masculine, musky scent. I actually wore it this morning to work out and it was perfect. I put on 4 sprays and I was smelling it all around me, but subtly. It's not a very, very strong scent. I wouldn't want it to be. This type of scent profile could get kind of obnoxious, honestly. It kind of loses its sparkle, loses its cleanliness, but it's clean, it's masculine, it's not necessarily sophisticated, doesn't smell like an older gentleman or a more refined gentleman would wear this. I think anyone could wear this. Excess from Paco Rabanne, an easy breezy wear. From 1992, the same year as a fragrance from Cartier called Pacha de Cartier, which I almost put in this video, but while I do believe it is timeless, I can see a lot of people disagreeing. I want to serve you guys, even though I'm putting together the video and the topic, the structure of it, I can objectively say that Pacha de Cartier, the original EDT, does smell a little bit dated, just a little bit, but it's an amazing scent with amazing quality and great performance if you're looking for that. But the fragrance we're talking about that came out alongside it that does have some similarities from Ralph Lauren, or Ralph Lauren, I should say. This is Safari for Men. This is a fougere. It does have a barbershop cleanliness to it, lavender, fresh herbs and spices, but there is this ambery leather quality, kind of like the way it looks. This looks like a little bit of a decanter for like whiskey or something. Maybe that's what they're going for. There is this classy gentleman feel. It does, again, smell like something you would smell on an older man, or at least an older, more mature demeanor. It doesn't have to mean age, but it does not smell old. It does not smell dated. So I love the depth that the leather and kind of warm ambery facet brings to this scent. It does give it another twist on the fougere genre, that barbershop type fragrance, kind of reminiscent of something a little bit more modern like Aiden Bob Egypt, which is way newer than this and would not be in this video because it's not vintage, but it does represent fragrances a little bit like this. This is good stuff. Unfortunately, not very cheap, even though it's been around a while, but I highly recommend checking it out if you're looking for yet another interesting take on the fougere. That is Ralph Lauren Safari. All right, the Eau de Parfum version of this came out in the 1950s. You would never think when you smelled it, but the Eau de Toilette version was released in 2000, many years later, but it still pays homage to the original DNA, which is utterly timeless. From Guerlain, we have Vetiver. Classic Vetiver. This really set a trend as far as Vetiver fragrances go, and I think there's many Vetivers that we would not have today if it were not for this fragrance. A lovely combination of woods and citrus. You mostly get lemon, maybe some bergamot, this classic citrusy accord that's very bright, a little bit mouth-watering, but sharp. The Vetiver, which is a woody element, is a little bit bitter and even a little bit smoky, and that adds a beautiful amount of depth to this, but smells utterly timeless. I can't believe that it smells like it could have come out at any time. This does not smell like a person necessarily. It is very niche. It smells like a scent, and you can place that scent wherever you want. But I do think a lot of people would say it's objectively masculine, and I think that's what it was intended for. Guerlain Vetiver is a masterpiece. Easily can say that, and that's pretty much indisputable. And the final fragrance on this list from, I believe, 1985, from the house of Creed, one of their most timeless fragrances ever. Still smells modern to this day. This is Green Irish Tweed. My bottle's gonna look a little weird for those of you who are not familiar. They don't make this bottle anymore. This is a 75 milliliter bottle, which doesn't exist anymore. It's an older batch, possibly from the year 2011. One of the most natural, beautiful, green smelling fragrances you can buy. Smells like wet grass, dewy, wet grass in the morning with fresh, cooling morning air. So invigorating. A little bit of iris in there, a little bit of lemon verbena, some musky ambergris. This is one of those fragrances that smells utterly beautiful, natural, and timeless, and sophisticated when you spray it on, but as it dries, it gets kind of sexy. Everything kind of melds together under the umbrella of that ambergris. It's still a little green and woody, but it gets this like salty, musky air to it, and it's just really alluring. Beautiful dry down. I can't speak for the current formulations, but I can speak for this. This is a lovely scent. Green Irish Tweed is a vintage gem. All right, I'd love to know what you think of vintage fragrances. Are you kind of put off by the term? When you hear that word, are you going the other way, or are you interested? I'm really curious to know if you have any experience with any of these fragrances, good or bad. Everything is fair, and we all come to this type of appreciation in our own time. If these are not for you, that's okay. But I think a natural part of the journey as we dig deeper and deeper into the art and history of fragrances, not only are we looking for more contemporary, modern pieces of art coming out from niche brands, then we kind of start to dig backwards. At least I can speak for myself. I started to look back more, and I never did that before. I was afraid of fragrances that came out before I was born. Now I'm intrigued by them. Some of them I don't care for. A lot of them I like. Anyway, that's just the natural evolution of things. Let me know if you can relate, and thank you so much for tuning in. Peace. I'll see you in the next one.